Our disease is typhoid fever, also known as typhoid. Other names associated with this disease are gastric fever, enteric fever, abdominal typhus, infantile remittent fever, slow fever, nervous fever, and pathogenic fever. Many of these names are more descriptive of the disease, as you'll see under our signs and symptoms. Etiology. The bacteria that causes typhoid fever is called Salmonella typhi. It is a gram-negative bacteria. Its morphology is bacillus or rod-shaped. It is motile biflagellum, and it is non-spore-forming but does have endotoxins as well as the VI antigen, which increases its virulence. Pathology. The typhoid bacteria gets into the bloodstream as well as adheres to the wall of the intestinal tract. S. typhi usually invades the surface of the intestine in humans, but have developed and adapted to grow into the deeper tissues of the spleen, liver, and the bone marrow. Transmission. Typhoid fever is transmitted person to person, or by consumption of fecal contaminated food or water by someone with typhoid, particularly undercooked meats. Proper cooking does kill the bacteria. Though it is not common to contract typhoid in the industrial countries such as the US, there are about 400 cases a year in the United States, most being contracted while traveling to developing countries, where typhoid is still common. Epidemiology. Typhoid has been known to kill 600,000 people a year globally. In the US, it hit a steep decline in the early 20th century due to new sanitation regulations. As you can see in our graph here, the death rate for typhoid fever in the United States from 1900 to 1960, there's a steep drop-off just before 1910. This is when chlorination began with the water filtration and treatment. The decline continued until about 1950 when death from typhoid was no longer prevalent in the U.S. Epidemiology worldwide. In 2000, typhoid fever caused an estimated 21.7 million illnesses and 217,000 deaths. In 2013, it resulted in about 161,000 deaths. Outbreaks of typhoid fever are frequently reported from sub-Saharan Africa and countries in Southeast Asia. Developing countries where sanitation is lacking are most susceptible to typhoid. This map shows incidence of typhoid fever globally. The red countries are where it is strongly endemic, orange is endemic, and the gray countries are where there's just sporadic cases, as in the US. Mortality rates. Historically, in the pre-antibiotic era, the case fatality rate of typhoid fever was 10 to 20%. Today, with prompt treatment, it is less than 1%. Did you know? Typhoid fever is often confused with typhus, a louse-borne disease, because they share common symptoms of fever, rash, and headache. The word typhoid actually means resembling typhus, and comes from the neuropsychiatric symptoms of delirium, common to both diseases. Until about 1837, the words typhus and typhoid were often used interchangeably for both diseases, even though typhoid has likely been a recognized disease since the time of Hippocrates in ancient Greece. Traveling tips. If you are traveling to developing countries where typhoid fever is still common, these food safety tips will help you stay healthy and away from typhoid fever. Adopt, boil it, cook it, peel it, or forget it. If you drink water, buy it bottled or bring it to a rolling boil for 1 minute before you drink it. Bottled carbonated water is safer than uncarbonated water. Avoid raw vegetables and fruits that cannot be peeled. Vegetables like lettuce are easily contaminated and are very hard to wash well. Avoid foods and beverages from street vendors. It is difficult for food to be kept clean on the street, and many travelers get sick from food bought from street vendors. Additional information. Salmonella typhi is only found in humans. Salmonella's ability to change its phenotype and genotype in response to environmental changes make it almost impossible to eradicate from the food chain. In relation to the restored gospel, the prophet Joseph Smith contracted typhoid fever when he was 7. The infection reached the bone in his leg, and he underwent a relatively experimental surgery as a result, drilling out the infected bone. He walked with a slight limp the rest of his life. Speaking of typhoid fever, Nathan Smith, Joseph's doctor, noted, "I have not perceived that occupation or habits of life make any difference in their ability to receive this disease, nor has it in this country been confined to the poor and filthy, but affects nearly alike the rich, the poor, and the middle class." Typhoid Mary. As Gary noted, another famous case of typhoid fever occurred in the early 20th century. Mary Malone, or more commonly known today as Typhoid Mary, was a cook in New York and, unknown to her, a healthy carrier of typhoid. She infected 50 people, 5 dying from it. She then infected another 25 at a women's hospital in Rhode Island after it was discovered that she was a carrier. Carriers. Like Mary, a small number of people who recover from typhoid become carriers, where they have no symptoms but can still affect other people, as Gary explained to us the different types. Mary Malone was the first traced carrier in the United States. Other notable cases. Prince Albert, husband of Queen Victoria, died of typhoid fever at the age of 42. Abigail Adams, wife of founding father and President John Adams, and mother of the 6th President John Quincy Adams, died of typhoid fever on October 28, 1818, at the age of 73. Wilbur Wright, the older of the 2 Wright brothers, died of typhoid fever on May 30th, 1912. Louise May Alcott, author of Little Women, acquired typhoid while being a nurse at a hospital in Washington, D.C., but survived. This is a picture of Lizzie Van Zyl, who was a child inmate in British-run concentration camp in South Africa, who died from typhoid fever during the Boer War. Historical epidemics. Researchers speculate that typhoid killed more than 6,000 Jamestown settlers between 1607 and 1624. In the war against South Africa in the late 19th century, British troops lost 13,000 men to typhoid, but only 8,000 in battle. Resources.